good qual data is very powerful because of its ability to bring out the things that consumers don't say. And that's often where the insight lies. Research almost never about looking for answers to the questions that you have. It's actually more often than not, it's about questioning the answers that are in front of you. And that's an epiphany that I've always taken with me. It's the first thing that I do is go, well, why do we think that this answer that we have in front of us is the answer? And you question from there. And then that's how you kind of find other things out, and you kind of start to observe the things that go without saying.
Welcome to Future Voices by Boardroom from SMG, the podcast where we explore the future of consumer insight, AI, brand marketing, and customer experience, with the visionaries shaping what comes next. We're also proud to announce that Future Voices is an official 2025 nominee for the Young Isama Society Award. In this episode, we're joined by Sibulele Mjali, an experienced and multi-skilled consumer insight specialist with nearly a decade experience shaping decision-making in the FMCG world. With a master's in business psychology, Sibulele blends behavioral understanding with sharp commercial thinking. She's known for her storytelling, clear briefs, data expertise, and ability to turn complex findings into actionable insights. A curious, consumer-centric self-starter, Sibulele is a true asset to any insights and analytics team, and we're excited to have her with us today. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Future Voices. Please welcome to Boardroom Future Voices, Sibulele. Sibulele, welcome.
Hi, so nice to be here.
It's so great to have you. First off, how are you doing?
Thank you. I'm very, very well. Thanks. I've had a great weekend, bit of rugby at the weekend, just, super nice and relaxed, but otherwise doing very well. We're going through British summer, which looks a bit like British winter, but, we're still calling it summer. We're hopeful here. Morale is high.
Morale is high. That's good. That's good. Were you tearing up when the South African national anthem played? Because I did, definitely.
Didn't I weep? And then I went onto the Internet of Things, and I realized everybody else was weeping. And I was like, okay, so it wasn't just me who I really felt something in that moment. It was just so special. KB came through, it was another thing. It was a whole lot. It was so much. And then the whole banner with, Hele Vietney, it was just such a beautiful moment. I teared up and then I teared up more because we finally broke the curse.
Yeah.
Finally broke the island curse. So it was a really good, just a good weekend, good time to be South African right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. So look, thank you once again for joining us for this episode, especially, highlighting and spotlighting you and just market research as an industry. I think, as Boardroom, a company that specializes in market research, we've worked with you before. It's really lovely to see us basically put it at the forefront of not only what we do, but in the minds and ears and eyes of brands. And I think this conversation is going to be so insightful for a lot of people. So thank you. I looked at I don't want to say I was snooping your LinkedIn profile. And I mean, you've worked at some incredible brands like Premier Foods, for example, just comes to mind. And yeah, I think for this specific topic, I think you're going to just drop some incredible gems. So once again, thank you.
No problem. I hope so. I mean, I've thought about it a lot. I think we've got some great things to discuss. I love that we're living in a time where people are actually talking about their day jobs in this way. So, it's giving cool. It's giving cool.
Amazing. So my first question to you is, how do you feel the landscape of market research has evolved over the years? And what do you think are some of the key trends that are actually shaping the industry today?
Yeah, I think probably one of the first things that I noticed is that, historically, we always had this kind of qual-quant divide. And I think that's closing a little bit, at least in the last 10 years or so. And really, that's with the rise of quant scale qual, the ability to access qualitative data in large numbers. I think the rise of that has really facilitated a bit of a closing of that kind of us versus them nature that it was. Certainly when I started, my career as a researcher, one of the things I was always asked is like, are you quali or are you quant? And that question's kind of dying down a little bit, just because the two are kind of converging. So I think, it's a great time to be a researcher just because of that. And I suppose also like that the rise of big data again is a contributing factor to this. And it's not to say that someone who's a specialist in quant is then also a specialist in qual, but rather that the two are kind of increasingly having to be used together instead of using them in isolation, which has always been kind of like the standard historically. So it's a good time. It's a good thing to see because they work better together. Actually, it's just knowing what you're doing with each one. I would also say like there's probably three. I've kind of thought about this from three different angles, and I'd say that the other big movement is really in the world of analytics. Historically, you've had market research being kind of this more primary research led as just how it operates as a discipline. Whereas now you're getting analytics, and analytics is kind of is the ability to structure unstructured data sets, right? And there's unstructured quali and quanti data sets all around us. So it's almost rising as this kind of like force essentially, and I think that's where the future is going really. So increasingly I do think that it's going to become more common or more of an expectation to at least be able to structure data sets, even as market researchers where your primary discipline might have been as a quali or as a quanti. The ability to at least read and understand data sets and from an analytics perspective, I think that's another thing that's probably wasn't there, maybe 5-6 years ago, but is certainly where the future is going now. So that's also very exciting. There's a lot of development going on in that space. And you obviously can't mention any of this without mentioning generative AI in that same kind of field. So it's all kind of linking together quite nicely. And I think that's what's pushing us to kind of, as market researchers, it's moving us a little bit away from the us and them and more towards how does this all work together and how do we become, more efficient as researchers and just asking better questions, getting, really meaningful answers, all of that kind of, it all snowballs together, so to speak. So, those are the three big things I think that have really reshaped where we are today versus where we were 10 years ago, the early forms of my career. And I definitely think anyone who's wanting to enter this field in the future, those are the three kind of spaces that you're going to need to have some proficiency in. So yeah, it's an exciting time.
Very. And I mean, you touched on it, generative AI. I was saying with another guest now, AI itself seemed like such of a foreign, alien, out of this world concept / idea, and then actually became like a reality that now in today's age and language, we talk about it, almost every day. And I find it interesting that you do bring it up, that it's also actually a trend or something that you can also see. I don't want to say infiltrating, but you can absolutely see generative AI or AI as a whole playing some kind of role in market research, shaping trends within market research. I think like AI is here to stay. What are your thoughts? Do you think like, yes, AI is here to stay, let's just get along with it? Or like, hey, there are those boundaries, the fine line between the two?
Do you know what? I think there's always going to be boundaries. There's always going to be a fine line. And I think that's for other people to kind of really understand and ascertain where those boundaries are. The reality is that it is here. It is here to stay. The other reality is that it has serious utility. In my job, actually, I use an AI software, a generative AI software, and it helps with transcribing, it helps with translations, it helps with like data querying. So I use it even for qual data sets, for taking, lots of big chunks of verbatim and turning it into like meaning and then being able to query that. That's something that just wasn't there before. So I think certainly there's always the conversation about like, where are the boundaries? And I think, yeah, okay, the people that is a conversation that needs to be had. But the reality is that it is here already, and it's got serious utility, so I am pro AI. If it's a question of that, I am definitely pro. I think it should, if used well, we should become better thinkers. We should, we should be, because it cuts out the doing time, the days of, belaboring large data sets just to get yourself a bit of a context going. You don't have to do that anymore. So now you can spend your time thinking better about what is it that I'm finding and why, what is it about what I'm finding that really matters, right? So In theory, it can only be a net positive. But of course, that is if used wisely.
And I guess my next question to you is, I consider you as a thought leader, and I think the rest of us here at Bulbshare have the same thoughts. You are a thought leader, and you're one who's got this really amazing, incredible research experience, for brands like Premier Foods, like Ferrero. And so a question I have for you is, can you perhaps share a light bulb moment that was pivotal or significant for you in shaping your journey as a researcher?
Oh yeah, I've had a few epiphanies, so to speak, but I'm going to go into one of them particularly, into a little bit of detail. So I remember working on a project when I was at Ferrero, and it was about mini eggs. Now, if you don't know, like mini eggs is like they come out at Easter, right? And like it's essentially like an Easter egg, but in like a mini format. And Cadbury is like the biggest player in that mini egg market. Now, the brief that was given to me from the brand team was that we want to understand how we can grow our share of the Easter occasion. And mini eggs, people start eating mini eggs as soon as New Year's is over. That stuff hits the market super early in the year. And so it's a really nice kind of way strategically to make sure that you're eating, that you're getting, I guess, shopper engagement from early on into the season. So it felt like the obvious kind of thing to go for. Now, the data sets that we'd been looking at, they were all mostly like EPOS data, so like sales data, and then like some Kantar data, which is like shopper data. And of course, as usual, there was no budget for qual. Because no one ever leaves budget to ask consumers what they think and want.
No.
People just don't. There's never budget for qual. It's like, can you find the answers in a different way, essentially? But what was going on is that the issue that I was having is that there was actually nothing in any of the data sets that we had that was explaining why the Kinder Mini Egg specifically was struggling for repeat purchase. And also it had like this relatively like despondent kind of low base sales. So year on year, the product would come out into the market, but the base sales were just not growing. And so we were struggling as well for like repeat purchase, that kind of stuff. So we were clear on the issues, or at least the context of the data sets in that way. But none of this was able to explain to us why. And so I decided to like just ignore and stop looking at the data sets that we currently had and just do some digging, basically. And I started doing some digging. I decided to just, again, stop looking at the data sets that we have, because the answers actually were not going to come from those data sets. So I started reading online reviews. But what I did was not look at Kinder Mini Egg reviews. I looked at online reviews for Cadbury Mini Egg, because they were the biggest in the market. And I was curious, okay, well, what's going on in that space? And in doing that, I actually found an instant trend. Like it was out there like broad daylight. And what it was is that loads and loads of consumers were complaining about the Cadbury Mini Egg. And they were complaining that it had become soft on the outside. And they were taken to the internet to let Cadbury know that that was not okay. They were like, it's become soft. What is wrong with the mini egg? And the instant connection that I made on that project was that actually the Kinder Mini Egg was the same. So it had never been designed to have a hard shell on the outside. And all that meant was that we'd actually missed the trick. So as a product, we had violated a consumer rule. The consumer rule was that mini eggs must be hard on the outside and then with a chocolate center. And the whole product at Kinder had actually violated that rule. So from that, I think I had two kind of epiphanies. One was that, and this was me being kind of, a little bit like a not a baby researcher, but, not a fully fledged researcher like I am now. But the first thing I kind of learned from that was that research is almost never about looking for answers to the questions that you have. It's actually more often than not, it's about questioning the answers that are in front of you. And that's an epiphany that I've always taken with me. It's the first thing that I do is go, well, why do we think that this answer that we have in front of us is the answer? And you question from there. And then that's how you kind of find other things out, and you kind of start to observe the things that go without saying. And also there's some really good frameworks that kind of now really help to support, and they help to support companies. I've actually taught all of my graduates and all of my junior guys that I look after. I teach them to do this in a more structured way. It's like a 5 whys framework. But the second thing that I realized as well was that good qual data is very powerful because of its ability to bring out the things that consumers don't say. And that's often where the insight lies, right? So what consumers were saying in that Cadbury's example is that we expect mini eggs to have a hard shell with a chocolate center. Those are the rules. But that's not necessarily what they said on the internet. They went on the internet and complained that it had gotten soft. And it was only in really understanding how qual data works and like how the human brain works that I was able to go, okay, it's because we're violating an expectation from the consumer here. So it's really that's the first time I really got to see how, if used and understood correctly, how powerful, qualitative data can be. And that wasn't an answer that we could have gotten at all from the quant data sets that we'd been looking at. So that's one I thought I'd actually like to share with you, just to kind of bring to life some of the things that, that I've had. And I've had multiple epiphanies ever since, just from thinking about data in that way. So yeah, I could probably share more, but that's a good one. That's probably my favorite.
That's a really good one, because even me thinking back now, I'm also I fall under that. Like I also have that like expectation where those mini eggs, because I also used to love buying them, and now that you bring it up, I'm like, yeah, I do remember there being a point where I actually didn't like them being too soft. Like I really do like that crunch of the hard shell, the nice little soft chocolatey center. And then there was a moment and a point where I was like, yeah, wait, no, they're not the same. I don't know that was a whole poor people also felt the exact same way, and you picked up on something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly what an insight is, by the way. It's the stuff that consumers don't tell you. And I'll get into this a little bit later on, but that's one of the best, probably the strongest, the biggest strengths of qual data is a good qual researcher knows how to understand the parts of the assumptions and the expectations and all of the stuff that consumers don't tell you, because for them it goes without saying. And you can't do that through quant alone. It just doesn't.
Amazing. And I think riding on this trend/wave and thought process that we're on now around qual versus quant, it's not just about the numbers, right? When it comes to data, this example you shared now with Cadbury, there's a story behind information, the data that's being told. You put it so beautifully. You picked up that, wait a minute, we're missing the mark here in terms of what are people saying online versus what's the actual experience, and unpacking and realizing that, oh, wait, we're kind of breaking some kind of norm/rule in the eyes of consumers. There's stories, right, behind the numbers that you see. And so I'd love to know, like, what are some of the things you love about the stories behind the data that you've experienced or gotten to work with in your research?
Yeah, I mean, you've asked it phenomenal. I mean, stories, we banned this word around, so much now. Storytelling, stories. But for me, the thing I love the most is that it really is deeply tied to who we are as a human animal. Our brains like for things to make sense. We like for things to be complete in the way that they've been explained. And I think that's one of the key benefits of qualitative data, is that yes, you might have a different experience to me, but I can completely understand your experience if we talk about it in a qualitative setting. And that's not something that's easily doable through survey method or just collecting masses and masses of data. So that's probably the my first kind of passion. And I'm a psychologist, so that's always going to be it's always going to seep through, even in research, because we are trying to understand humans and their behavior here. So that's probably one of the biggest things. Now, in terms of different types of stories or the stories behind the data, I've seen so much of this. I worked for a brand who makes yogurt, and one of the biggest actually in the world. And we did this deep dive. So they came to me with this problem or curiosity, let's say. And they were like, Sibs, we can see in like our quant data sets, we're seeing this over-index with large families. And initially we thought so large families are using lots and lots of yogurt. And initially they thought that it was because of like the pack size, but then when they boiled the data down, it's not the pack size. It seems to be driven by large families. And so they said, we're curious about this, help us to explore it. So I did exactly that. It was an explore and learn. And I spoke with members from the South Asian community. We spoke with members from the British kind of Caucasian community. We spoke with people from the Black community in England. So very vibrant, diverse, lots of different cultural contexts to help us understand what's going on with their usage of yogurt. So like, how are they using yogurt? How much of it are they using? So we were able to capture like both kind of the closed end data to give us the context. And then we were capturing the stories. And we hit on something really, really interesting for these guys, which is that a lot of that growth, or rather that huge drive in large families, was coming from these big South Asian families, who a lot of them tend to live together for a very long time. So I think most South Asian cultures, you don't actually leave home until you're leaving to get married. And sometimes you see married people still living with mom and dad. So these tend to be really, really big, large households. And not only that, but they use yogurt in bucket loads, because they're using yogurt for different things. So again, the brand had this living, breathing story inside the building, which is that yogurt key occasion is breakfast and snacking. So most people use it either as like something to have with a breakfast item or at breakfast, or they use it for snacking. And that's something that they've been living and breathing until they spoke with us. And we were like, well, actually, you've got a massive South Asian community here in the UK, and they are using yogurt for marinating, for cooking. They use it for drinking. They use it's so many different occasions. And that was better able to explain what they were seeing in their data set. So these large families are not just big in terms of size, but they're big in terms of actual usage of product. And that's probably one of my favorite stories. And some other things that we learned along the way there as well was that really any product that's like a milk-based product is so integrally linked to your childhood experience of it. So we saw this distinction between like East Asian community members, and they were telling their stories of, I didn't grow up on cow's milk, I grew up on soya milk. And so when I used to see cow's milk, it was like in an American ad with cereal, but this is all foreign to me. So some of the ways in which we think about products and all of that is like, okay, fine, that probably captures about 70% of the UK market now. And then there's this remaining 30% that's doing something fundamentally different to anything you have ever heard. And I think that that was one of my kind of more recent experiences, where talking to people really helped you understand and explain some of the data sets that you were seeing. And they've gone on to use this strategically. It's a living, breathing UNA for them. You know, it's an addition to work that they already had. So that's a really good kind of example of that, I think.
Brand experience, customer experience, and employee experience aren't isolated. They're interconnected. But too many organizations treat experience management like separate programs, which leads to scattered data, disconnected systems, and missed opportunities. That's why a unified approach matters, and that's why we built Ignite. Ignite is SMG's purpose-built AI-native platform, built to bring brand, customer, and employee experience together in one place. No silos, no lag, just complete real-time visibility across every touchpoint that matters. Ignite pulls in real-time feedback, transactions, third-party data, and behavioral signals, then processes it with advanced analytics and AI tools. From sentiment shifts to location-level performance, Ignite's AI agents analyze billions of data points, uncovering the why behind the what and telling you what to do next. And it doesn't stop at insights. Ignite connects intelligence to action, automating tasks, tracking progress, and enabling every team to improve experiences in the moment. When your experiences are unified, your impact multiplies. Happier customers, empowered employees, stronger business results. This is Ignite, unified experience management, powered by AI, built by SMG.
And I love that story because it feels so personal, even to me here all the way in South Africa, where rightly said, like I grew up on cow's milk, and I identified as well with my childhood. Like you get to primary school, it's cow's milk in your cereal, and if you want it in your tea and coffee. it's only when I got older and moved to like the city where soy milk, almond milk,
Oat.
and
Yeah.
and now it's
Yeah.
in smoothies, and people put a bit of it like in marinade and sauces, and actually you can go take it as far as like in beauty products for your hair, and you can mix it with honey, and it's a mask. And I'm like, oh, how interesting that your story that you just told us now hits home. But like you said, like it's different stories coupled with where, you know, upbringing, coupled with like where people live, where they're based, and how a product use is used differently in one place versus another, even though you're in the same country.
And that all comes with you, you know, culture. That's why I love, you know, you unearth culture when you have conversations. And that isn't, again, something that quantitative on its own can help you get to, right? And I think it's interesting, like even as you know, both of us South Africans, so I grew up on cow's milk. I've been dabbling in oat milk. I've been cheating on cow's milk with oat milk as well. But if you talk to a Nigerian, for example, you know, West African, they didn't grow up on cow's milk. So they grew up on like powdered milk. So like powdered skimmed milk, or like, think what they call it. Nunu is like one of the big brands there. So a completely different milk experience as a child, which then informs the milk choices that they make as adults. So all of it is very, very linked. And you can't, again, meaning like that, you can't get from asking a bunch of people, you know, stuff in closed ends, or just looking at sales data, for example. So, you know, there's still value in qual, shall we say.
And so next question is then, why do you think data storytelling is essential to brands, specifically qualitative data? And, you know, why do you think it deserves to be heard in every boardroom when brands are talking about, you know, storytelling and ensuring that they're listening to the data, but including that data storytelling element?
Yeah, do you know what? I'm a big proponent of this. And it's for a number of reasons. I'm not gonna lie. One of them is it's not laziness per se, but there's only so much that as an insights professional or as a researcher you can do to convince the top of the tops. But once you can put consumers in there, they kind of do that for you. So why not get consumers in the boardroom? This is everyone's client, right? So it feels remiss not to be doing that. And I do think I've learned, you know, over time that, you know, brand owners, brand directors, people who are making decisions on behalf of brands, they do want to hear what consumers have to say. And it's such a powerful tool. Even as recently as like last week, I think I had a proposal that I was working for a pretty big client, and they wanted to talk to people from the LGBTQIA plus community, for example, in Brazil. And we managed to get them. So this is the type of research that we do. We got a couple of vox pops in, just a few people to answer one of their questions, and it blew them away, because people want to hear from people. So it's a very, very compelling way to just kind of help people, you know, decision makers, for example, to connect them with the people that they don't get to do that every day with. So honestly, I'm a big fan of that. So that's one reason. One is just, you know, what's more compelling. And then the second one is like, from a storytelling perspective, I think as human beings, there's nothing that the brain hates more than ambiguity in story. It just kind of like irritates the brain, and you almost like can't move on, right? So an analogy that I like to use is like, imagine if Goldilocks had given scores rather than feedback. So if Goldilocks had eaten Papa Bear's porridge and said, oh, it's a 6.5 out of 10, and then gone to Mama Bear's porridge and said, oh, it's a 6 out of 10. The ambiguity of that, and just like how irritating it is, we would never move on. We'd get stuck on, well, what do you mean 6.5? And what's the difference between 6 and 6.5? You don't complete your story. So what you need is the qualitative insights of, this one is too hot, this one is too cold, in order for you to really understand what's going on. And I think that's what the benefit of qual research is. It's exactly the ability to say, this one is too hot. And if you want, you can say, therefore it scores 6.5. This one is too cold, therefore it scores X. But you must get, this one is too hot, this one is too cold, in order for you to be able to tell your story. And that's the beauty and the benefit and the superiority, I think, of qualitative data. And I've lived in a world where I've done both. I'm quite capable of living in both universes. But in the quant universe, you see the 6.5 too much, you know? The
Mm.
amount of times I have seen data that comes back and it says, oh, it scored 6.5, and no one can make heads or tails of what to do next about that number. Qual just removes the ambiguity. And that's why it's a very powerful tool for storytelling, because then you can tell your story. You can say for some, it's too hot, for some, it's too cold. And there are those for whom it's just right. So this is why I think there's a real power, I think, to qual data when it comes to storytelling in particular. And we love stories, you know, as human beings. This is how we first make sense of the world, is through stories. So, you know, it's not a technique that's going to disappear from our toolkit anytime soon. So why not use it, and why not use it really well? So yeah.
Amazing. Wow, I'm gonna actually look at that Goldilocks story a little differently now, because absolutely, I'm also I'm very much not only a fan, because I read that story countless times as a child, but now when you kind of flip the script on it, you go, actually, yeah, what would have happened if Goldilocks was like, on a scale of 1 to 10, I think this porridge is a 7. What do you mean? Like, what are the factors that go into that 7? What about the rest of the 3? Why is it not all the way a 10 out of 10? So I think you've just changed the way I will read Goldilocks.
I think that's simple, right? Imagine if Goldilocks had given scores and not actual feedback. Is just a nice way to kind of put it into an understandable framework. And that's, again, that is the issue with quant data in isolation. Not to say that, you know, one is preferred over the other. I think quant data has a job in that it's really good for context setting, but for real understanding, for adding meaning, for really drawing depth through it, I think you cannot do it you can't use it just on its own. And that's where qual becomes very powerful. And then, of course, as I said before, the ability to put consumers in front of people who make decisions on brands. I've never seen anything more powerful than that. It's very compelling. So that remains very important.
Next question is, what do you think are some of the common challenges that market researchers are facing today, and how can those challenges be overcome?
Yeah, so I think with the rise of AI, with the rise of people, of data just in general, there's a lot of kind of data and information overload, I think. And that's something, broadly speaking, that kind of it needs to be dealt with, right? Because the ability to kind of distill data quickly and make data-led decisions, and good data-led decisions, there's a bit of a paralysis that I see in the market, and that's just driven by information overload. We're still a human processor. We're not machines ourselves. So that's something that I do think, though, can be fairly easily remedied with AI itself. So AI can go some way, I think, to help with distilling data, storing it, and searching the right information sources, all that kind of stuff. But I do think overload is probably up there. But then on a more kind of practical perspective, I think and this is probably an observation rather than a fact, to be super transparent, but I think that those on the receiving end of insights still somewhat prefer quant data. And the reason for that is that it's easier to digest, and it also gives this impression of scalability. And so when I think about an example, if I was to put in my previous life, if I was to put just qualitative data in front of someone who's so used to seeing and dealing with this big kind of quant data set, it would take a bit to convince them that this is good enough on its own. It's enough strategically for you on its own, because most of them, they still kind of prefer quant data. It's because it gives the impression of scale, right? And that's what we're trying to do as brands, always reach more people. But I think one of the tricks that I've learned that does actually make it, that made me better at being able to question and also help them understand the need for more qualitative data, is that a good thing or rather a way around this for researchers is to question why they think that a certain stat is true. And most of the time you'll find that the stats are usually being taken at face value, and not without any kind of like real question or even being fully understood. And to give you a bit of context around that, so I don't know, I'm going to take a random stat. Let's take Goldilocks again. Let's say there was more than just one person, right? So let's take 100 Goldilockses, and they all the average score came in at 6.5. a lot of the time that it almost like the questioning stops there. It's like, well, 6.5, that's the number, that's the stat. And actually what we should be doing as researchers is going, well, we're still missing why 6.5 and not 7. And why does 6.5 matter in the scheme of what we're trying to do? So a way around it, I think, for researchers is to be able to become really efficient and really good at questioning some of the headline stats. Because I still see a lot of organizations, a lot of businesses making decisions based on a headline stat and not really understanding why that headline stat is true or isn't. So that's one of the things. And I understand it, having lived on both sides of the coin now, both agency side and client side. I understand why it's easier to take a headline figure and run with it, because it's harder to explain humans at that kind of next level. But I don't think a lot comes from not questioning, if that makes sense. It's only when you do question that you do come out with something far more insightful and far more useful. And I've had experience with that as well before. So yeah, that's, I guess, to summarize that, the second challenge, I think, for researchers, one, there's obviously the challenge of information overload. And then two, the second challenge is that for the most part, most guys who are decision makers still favor quant style data. So it's about thinking of ways to cut through that.
And you're such a great storyteller, first of all. You have me like thinking so long and hard actually about fundamentally how important it really is to actually, like you said, not just take the numbers at face value, to really always question, like, okay, cool, the 6.5, but why the 6.5? And like you said, why not the 7? Why not the 8? What would it take to get to the 8 in the eyes of Goldilocks? What was missing for the other 2.5 or the 3.5? So
absolutely,
all of that, yeah, it's you've got gears turning in my mind, and which is a good thing. It's a good thing. I'm a processor. I'm a human processor. I'm processing information, but I'm also like getting all these new. Gosh, I just want to keep asking you like more questions and go on and on and on, but I know that we can't. One question I also have here is, could you perhaps maybe share a story where market research data led to a significant strategic decision for any of the brands you've worked for?
So at the I used to work at Little Freddie as well. So Little Freddie was a startup baby food brand, award-winning, might I say. It's probably one of the most proudest brands that I've actually worked on. And I worked on all things consumer related. So from the innovation pipeline to helping to set the brand strategy for the next few years, to segmentation, all of the different parts to it. And obviously, as a startup brand, you have zero budget for, we're going to commission this nice big research. No. Like zero budget. And I actually found ways to access all over the UK new mums who were just about to go into weaning. And I ended up partnering with a really lovely woman who, she would send me people to talk with, and like I would go to some of the like meetups that they used to have. And so it was fully qual data at that sense, if you want to. I mean, it was a conversational qual, but it was still kind of really good qual. And one of my favorite decisions from that, and actually this is a product that is now in the market here in the UK, but we were product testing one of the biggest kind of baby snacking brands in the UK is a brand called Kiddelicious. And they do a product called like Kiddelicious straws or whatever. And it is like huge. I think like it's massive. It's a pretty big deal. Even parents eat it. That is how good it is. And we wanted something that was kind of like a healthier but also sustainable version, and like et cetera, et cetera. So we wanted to play in that space and maybe steal some share. And so our guys in innovation went ahead and they developed a product which I thought was, it was tasty, was good enough from the key kind of credentials, but they wanted to call it a straw. And I was like, that to me was like marketing, doing what marketing does, right? So like, we're just going to call it a straw. And I was like, this isn't giving straw. This is not the shape of a straw. This is not within what consumers think about when they think straws. So you're going to get a disconnect from product expectation to product experience. And yes, you have to understand to what extent will be the penalty of that. But I immediately was like, we're going to need to test this with mums. And that's what came back, right? From immediately from the research was that I wouldn't call this a straw. And you might not think these things matter, but they actually do when on fixture and you go on shelf, because it's the difference between playing so that you can win share from your competitor or playing to open up a whole new market and a whole new territory. And that's what we got to in the end. So actually in the end, they were tubes. And that because the shape was more tubular, there was nothing in the market called tubes at the time. And yet when we worked with our nutritionist, this kind of like, it's all linked to with like baby development and like pincer movement and all of that. The tube was actually a really special and unique style of a product to bring into the market as babies kind of learn to grip at that age. And that was going to do a much better job of it than the straw was. So suddenly we had this whole new strategy, as it were, on what are we going to do with these supersede tubes. And like it was like, we're not going to call them straws anymore, and actually we're going to talk to parents about something completely different based on the product that we developed. And I see them on shelf and I think they're doing very well. And that was something that is seemingly small, but it changed the strategy, changed the direction of the innovation pipeline. And it's a product that is still it's still in the market. It's probably a good 4 years old now. So that's something I'm particularly proud of. Yeah. So, qual data can change strategy. It's harder in bigger organizations. Obviously, you've got a bit more people to convince. You've got a lot more of that kind of stuff to do. But even in that situation, I brought the mums into the office and I said, let's have this conversation with mums here. So it made it easier, I guess, for the brand director to make a decision on that. So, that was a win.
Amazing. Wow, that is incredible. And again, it sounds small, but like the significance of being able to get that insight, make a decision that ultimately led to the success of the brand. And when I think about that, that's exactly what data should be doing. We talk data-driven decisions, and absolutely we're doing that. But again, it's understanding that story behind the data that then leads to that data-driven decision, that then leads to the impact that you see. Tubes, straws, 100%. It's cool to see that you noted that, wait a minute, there's going to be that disconnect. Let's have a think. And from that, you go from straws to tube, which then makes sense. Tie in the fact that you've got a nutritionist who gives their input, and at the end of the day, the brand's successful 4 years later. So wow.
It was very different. What really interests me there is that we went from a tactical brand strategy of we want to steal share from this competitor to a genuine consumer-led innovation, which is actually we want to talk to moms about pincer movement. We want to talk to them about baby grip. We want to fix the issues with other products, for example. Plus, it's also much healthier and it's super tasty, right? So we suddenly had all these other things, and that is what you call a proposition. So we went from a tactical launch to a genuine proposition, all from talking to mums, but also, I guess that was a little Freddie as well. I kind of had this in the back of my head about the whole mini egg thing of like, actually, I knew immediately there's going to be a disconnect because I'd seen this before. I had like a blueprint for it. And so we started to question in that territory. And we went from, something that was a tactical thing to now a genuine proposition. And who knows, someone might copy us now, because that's the format that works. So always very important, to get to the bottom of it. And it's, again, in some environments you can do that. You don't have the time pressure, for example, and in other environments less so, but still compelling to bring consumers into it.
Yeah. And I mean, hey, look, if you do get copied, I do believe there's a quote that says imitation is the highest form of flattery, or it's yeah. So if you see any competitors out there copying the work that you did, I guess it's a high compliment.
And we accepted when we're on to the next one, right? That's the whole point. You do that one and you get on to the next one. So yeah, no, definitely.
Amazing. Sibulele, it's been so fabulous talking to you. And I really mean it when I say that I could go on and on and on just chatting to you, but I sadly have to wrap up the episode with one last question, which is, considering our topic for today, getting back to the why in insights and telling the story behind data, and how you've basically been shining a light on the value of data behind, or stories behind data, what are your top 5 tips for balancing quantitative data with qualitative insights to get a comprehensive understanding of the market?
Yeah, I've thought about these, and actually I'm gonna give them nice and quickly, because just in the interest of time, because with each of these I could go on and on. But I would probably say, first keen observation is never ask a closed-end question without understanding why you're even asking it as a closed end. So I see this mistake a lot. People go, which of the following is true for you? And then you get this list, and I'm like, well, where's that list come from? How do you know that this is the right list? So never ask a closed end without knowing why you're asking it as a closed end. The second, and usually, to be fair, if you do that exercise alone, the first thing you'll notice is you need some qual. But that's the trick. The second one is never ask a closed end in isolation. So always follow up, So if you're giving people a list of things to tick, ask them why they said specifically that thing. Otherwise, you end up with a disconnect, and you end up with a 6.5, but not knowing if it's hot or it's cold. So that's like thing number 2. Number 3, I would say, think about quant data as the context and not the story. It's contextually relevant that, Goldilocks scored Papa Bear's porridge 6.5. It's great context, but it is not the story. The story is that it was too hot. So think of quant data as context, not the story. And then also watch out for ambiguity. And if you see it, don't just ignore it, right? Our brains do not like ambiguity. And I see ambiguity a lot in the data sets where, something comes through and it's like, oh, it's a 55%. And then people are kind of going, it's directionally better than the other. And I'm like, no, it's not. 55 is 55. It's an ambiguous number. And you can interpret it as a positive or a negative, depending on how you're trying to spin the story. So when you see ambiguity, try and deal with it. Usually you need more research, or you need some qual. And then probably most importantly is that remember that in human communication in general, we're really bad at providing that context naturally. So we tend to leave our assumptions and our expectations inside our heads when we say things, or when we're answering things, or when we're responding to a question. We don't always think fully out loud. We just give the answer without the context. It's just a flaw of being human. We live inside our heads. And that's where the insight is. So that is qualitative data that can help you really unpack that. And that's always, if you're in a situation where you think there's context missing from a number or a data set, usually your go-to answer is qual. And the right researcher can help you get there. We can unlock that kind of the stuff that's been locked inside our heads. That's the job of qual, is to bring that from the inside to the outside. So yeah, key thing, just remember that as humans, we're very bad at communicating in general. We're even worse in closed end formats. So that's pretty much it. I think that's 5.
Amazing. A fabulous 5. And I mean, look, oh gosh. Yeah, I wish we could have gone on. But from me to you, from Bulbshare to you, from our listeners to you, it's been the biggest pleasure to have you on our show. Thank you so much for just dropping beautiful gems, sharing amazing, incredible stories. And I mean, I'm walking away so inspired to think a bit better in terms of, like when I do create briefs for our community in the Bulbshare app and on mybulbshare.com, you gave me a tip right there. I need to actually follow up with a couple other questions whenever I ask an open-ended question. I don't do that. So you've given me some practical tips to walk away. I know there's a listener or two out there who feels exactly the same way. So Sibulele, it's been amazing. You are amazing. Thank you so much. And until next time.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Future Voices by Bulbshare from SMG. To learn more, head over to smg.com, where we'll show you how we can help transform insights into real-time action with purpose-built AI, thanks to our unified experience management approach. Click the link in the description to read our latest blog post, where we'll show you how brand communities help you gather fast, meaningful feedback to stay ahead of shifting customer preferences and market trends.